Jordan, I want to start with you because now you are reporting that we're looking at 3 potential avenues of attack here, including the hardware attack that we talked about yesterday. Walk us through these 3 different avenues of attack.
Sure. Thanks for having me on, Emily. Here's what we're looking at. So we reported yesterday on the added chips, the malicious chips that were added to Supermicro motherboards that wound up inside Apple and Amazon and dozens of other companies. But that wasn't it. That wasn't the only element of this attack. It was the most significant. But what according to U.S. officials, according to what the Chinese hackers also allegedly did, was infect a Supermicro customer portal where customers would go to update both the firmware and the software on their servers. So what this meant was, if you didn't get the malicious chips in your network, you might have gotten these other elements of the attack. So it was basically, it's a way to attack hardware in 3 different ways to access sensitive networks. It's quite a sophisticated and broad type of attack.
Now, talk to us about how Apple specifically, they've denied the hardware hack, but they have acknowledged a malware hack. Explain.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'll walk you through what we reported. I mean, what we reported was that Apple discovered 3 different types of hardware manipulations involving its servers. One was the discovery of the added malicious chips in Supermicro servers. 2 was the presence of outdated firmware on the network card of their servers. And the 3rd was the presence of malicious firmware on the Supermicro website. So these were all attacks that happened in 2015 that Apple was aware of. What Apple mentions in its statement, and as anyone who's read the story knows, there is a big gap between what what we report and what Apple and Amazon say. But what Apple says happened was that there was a minor software infection a year after the events that we described from that same Supermicro portal, and that's the reason Apple says it cut off Supermicro as a supplier.
Now, Sam, as Jordan and our colleague Mike Riley have reported, there is still an open U.S. government investigation into these issues. What are you hearing in the intelligence community about this?
You know, I think there's a lot of debate right now. The problem is that the information needed to verify this is so sensitive. Whether it's companies themselves don't really know, who would have access to this information is very limited. And then within the government, it's highly unlikely that we're going to see displayed publicly the kind of information that information security professionals would need to be able to verify what happened. So we're going to need to just watch how this plays out.
So then how does this play out behind the scenes, do you imagine?
I think that we could be looking at a congressional hearing perhaps in the future. You know, the timing of this is also very interesting because the news broke the same day that we have Vice President Pence's speech, in which he essentially says, look, we're in a technology and cyberspace conflict with China that's only getting deeper. So this is just one piece of a deepening conflict that we're going to see across multiple fronts with China.
Jordan, when we talk about these 3 different avenues of attack, do they all go back to China? You know, if China could have, accomplished this God hardware hack, why would they need to do all of these other kinds of things?
Sure, good question. Yeah, according to our sources, the same group responsible for the added chips, the added components to the motherboards, was also responsible for the compromise of Supermicro's customer software portal. And it's a really good question. Like, if you can modify hardware at the factory, the thing that we report that Amazon and Apple found, why would you need to do anything else? And the short answer is, these attackers want every avenue they can possibly get into sensitive facilities. So, and if the hardware implants are discovered, a customer portal is a great way to impact a number of other users. If the added chips are very hard to put into computer servers, so they want easier ways as well, and these other vectors of attack accomplish that.
Is any one of these attacks worse than the other? I know we talked about a unicorn jumping over a rainbow, this hardware hack. Is that the worst of it?
Well, the added chip, the added chip that we reported yesterday, that is the most sophisticated. It is the hardest to detect. It's impossible to remove. However, this idea of modifying firmware, of modifying the code on legitimate chips, That's an easier attack, and in many ways it can accomplish the same thing. You can have a technical debate about which is harder or which is more permanent, but modifying firmware in many ways is the simpler attack. It lasts just as long, and it's equally as damaging.
Sam, what do you believe the ramifications of this will be all the way back to China?
For Chinese customers around the world, there is so much suspicion. So China's trying to sell 5G to invest in their own indigenous chip industry. Nobody's going to want to buy from China now. So I think this has deep ramifications. It shows that sometimes Beijing's security goals directly undermine their global commercial ambitions.
And how do you think it will impact the relationship between the U.S. and China, which is already, high tension?
I think this is going to accelerate what we're seeing as a decoupling between the industrial and the technology relationship between our two countries. We're already seeing discussions of blocking Chinese students in the U.S. I'm looking next to potential bans on Huawei and ZTE coming out from the administration. This justifies it and accelerates a trend already underway to drive a wedge between the two countries.
Jordan, I know you're continuing to pull the strings here. What else are you looking at? What are we waiting for?
Well, yeah, the report yesterday was really just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, once we started looking at hardware, and we got that tip, which I should note the first tip came during the Obama administration from some private sector folks. But once we started looking at hardware and hardware security, it opened up a whole new world of reporting to us, and we have a lot more to come. Related to how do you secure hardware, what is found on hardware in some of these data centers. It's a very interesting space, and the big lesson is you're not going to find this stuff unless you look, and then once you look, you're going to find some very, very interesting things.